The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after I'd sent my portfolio to a junior creative director at a major advertising agency. "We love your work," it read. "We have a potential project that might be a good fit. Can you jump on a call tomorrow?" I was ecstatic. This was the break I'd been waiting for, a chance to work with a global brand, to have my designs seen by millions, to finally get paid what I was worth. I didn't know then that the call would be the beginning of a nightmare. I didn't know that the potential project would become my work, my property, my intellectual property, stolen and broadcast to 100 million people. Let me rewind. I'm Zoe, a freelance graphic designer and illustrator. I've been working for myself for 8 years, building a portfolio, cultivating clients, scraping by on projects that range from inspiring to soul-crushing. I'm good at what I do, really good, but in the creative world, being good isn't enough. You need connections, luck, and a thick skin. The agency that reached out was called Vanguard Creative. They represented some of the biggest brands in the world: soda companies, car manufacturers, tech giants. The junior creative director who emailed me, a woman named Sarah, seemed genuinely excited about my work. On our call, she told me about the project. A major brand was launching a new product, and they needed a visual identity for the campaign. She couldn't tell me which brand yet, confidentiality agreements, but she hinted that it was household name level. I spent the next 2 weeks working on concepts. Sarah was responsive, enthusiastic, full of feedback. "Love this direction. Can you explore this variation?" The client is very excited. I sent her dozens of sketches, refined versions, final concepts. I worked nights and weekends, convinced this was my big break. Then, after 2 weeks of intense work, the email stopped. I followed up. Nothing. I called. No answer. I waited a week. Then 2. Then a month. Finally, I got a one-line email from Sarah. "Thanks for your work, but the client decided to go in a different direction. We'll keep you in mind for future projects." That was it.
No explanation. No payment.
No acknowledgement of the hours I'd put in, the concepts I'd created, the value I'd provided. I was crushed. But I was also a freelancer, and freelancers know that sometimes projects fall through. I wrote it off as a loss, updated my portfolio, and moved on. I had no idea that my designs hadn't been rejected at all. 3 months later, I was at a Super Bowl party at a friend's apartment. Chips, dip, beer, and the usual overhyped commercials. I wasn't really paying attention until the ad for Nova beverages came on. Nova was a major brand, one of the biggest soda companies in the world. Their new product was a revolutionary energy drink, and their Super Bowl ad was a splashy, expensive production. Celebrities, special effects, the whole 9 yards. And at the center of it, for a brief moment, was my design. I sat up so fast I spilled my drink. There it was, my illustration, my composition, my color palette, featured prominently in the ad. It was only on screen for a few seconds, but it was unmistakably mine.
"Zoe?
"You okay?" my friend asked. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the screen, watching my stolen work being broadcast to millions of people. I replayed the ad on my phone, frame by frame. There was no doubt. The design was mine. The same concept I'd spent 2 weeks developing for Sarah at Vanguard Creative. The same illustrations, the same typography, the same composition. They'd used it. They'd stolen it. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, cycling through anger, disbelief, and a cold, focused determination. By morning, I had a plan. I contacted a lawyer. A woman named Priya, who specialized in intellectual property and creative rights. She listened to my story, reviewed my emails with Sarah, and examined the screenshots I'd taken of the ad. "Zoe, this is clear-cut copyright infringement. They used your work without permission, without payment, without credit. You have a strong case." But I never signed a contract. I never even got paid for the initial work. That doesn't matter. Under copyright law, you own your creations from the moment you create them. Sending them to a potential client doesn't transfer ownership. They had no right to use them. So I can sue them? You can. But it'll be a fight. They have deep pockets and expensive lawyers. They'll drag this out, try to wear you down. You need to decide if you're ready for that. I thought about the 2 weeks of work, the nights and weekends, the excitement I'd felt. I thought about the way Sarah had ghosted me, the casual cruelty of that one-line rejection. I thought about the Super Bowl ad, my work broadcast to millions, with no credit, no payment, no acknowledgement. I'm ready. Priya nodded. Then let's start by sending a cease and desist letter. And a demand for payment. The letter went out the next day. It was straightforward. Acknowledge the infringement, pay fair market value for the work, and issue a public credit. Failure to comply would result in a lawsuit. The response came within 48 hours. It was from a lawyer, a man named Harrison who specialized in defending corporations against frivolous claims. The letter was dismissive, condescending, and legally aggressive. Your client has no standing. The work in question was created by Vanguard Creative's in-house team. Any resemblance to your client's portfolio is coincidental. If your client persists in these baseless accusations, we will pursue legal action for defamation and harassment. They were doubling down, denying everything, treating me like a nuisance to be crushed. I called Priya. They're lying. They're saying they created it themselves. I know. I've seen this before. They're hoping you'll back down, that you don't have the resources to fight. The question is, do you have proof? Emails, sketches, timestamps, anything that shows the work was yours and that you shared it with them. I thought about the 2 weeks of collaboration, the dozens of emails, the sketches I'd sent, each one bearing my signature style and my watermark. The watermark. I'd almost forgotten. In my early days as a freelancer, I developed a habit of embedding a tiny, nearly invisible watermark in every design I sent to potential clients. Not a visible logo, that would ruin the presentation, but a subtle pattern, woven into the design itself, that only I could identify. A signature, hidden in plain sight. I pulled up the original files I'd sent to Sarah. There it was, my watermark embedded in the design. And when I zoomed in on the Super Bowl ad frame by frame, there it was again. The same pattern, the same signature. Proof that they'd used my work. I sent the evidence to Priya. Her response was immediate. This changes everything. They can't deny it now. But the Super Bowl ad had already aired. Millions of people had seen it. The damage was done. And I had to decide, do I settle quietly, or do I take them public? So what do you think I should do? Take the settlement and move on, or expose them to the world? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 2 is about the fight, and it's just beginning.
Subscribe.
The watermark was my secret weapon. For years, I'd embedded a tiny, nearly invisible signature in every design I sent to clients, a pattern of dots that formed my initials, woven into the texture of the image. It was subtle enough to be undetectable to the naked eye, but unmistakable when zoomed in. I developed the habit after hearing horror stories from other freelancers about stolen work. I never thought I'd need it. But when I pulled up the Super Bowl ad and zoomed in on my stolen design, there it was, my watermark, clear as day, hidden in plain sight. I sent the evidence to Priya. She called me within the hour. Zoe, this is gold. This is undeniable proof that they used your work. But we have to be strategic about how we use it. What do you mean? If we go to court with this, they'll try to argue that the watermark was added after the fact, that we're manipulating evidence. We need to establish a clear chain of custody, timestamps, metadata, everything that proves these files existed before the ad was created. I spent the next week documenting everything. I pulled the original files from my archives, complete with creation dates and metadata. I printed out the email chains showing when I'd sent them to Sarah. I created a side-by-side comparison of my original design and the frame from the Super Bowl ad, with the watermark circled in red. Then Priya sent a second letter. This one was different.
No demands. No threats.
Just a simple question. We have proof that your client used our work. Would you like to see it before we file a lawsuit and issue a press release? The response came within 24 hours. Not from Harrison, the aggressive lawyer, but from someone new, a woman named Rachel, who identified herself as Vanguard Creative's head of legal affairs. Her tone was completely different. MS. Priya, We'd like to schedule a call to discuss this matter. We believe there may have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That's what they called it when they stole my work and broadcast it to millions. The call was scheduled for the next day. I joined from my home office, my heart pounding. Rachel was polite, professional, and clearly nervous. Harrison was there too, but he was quiet, his earlier bravado gone. MS. Zoe, Rachel began, we've reviewed your evidence. We acknowledge that your work appears to have been used in our client's Super Bowl ad without proper authorization. We're prepared to offer a settlement. I waited. We're prepared to pay you $50,000 for the use of your work, plus a public acknowledgement of your contribution. In exchange, you would agree not to pursue legal action and to keep the terms of the settlement confidential.
$50,000.
It was more money than I'd ever been offered. It would pay off my debts, fund my next project, give me breathing room. But something about it felt wrong. I looked at Priya, who was on the call with me. She raised an eyebrow, signaling that I should decide. Rachel, I appreciate the offer, but I need to know who made the decision to use my work without permission. Was it someone at Vanguard? Or the client? Rachel hesitated. I'm not sure that information is relevant to the settlement. It's relevant to me. I spent 2 weeks on this project. I was ghosted, rejected, and then I saw my work on the Super Bowl. Someone knew what they were doing. I want to know who. A long pause. Then Rachel spoke, her voice carefully neutral. The decision was made at the client level. Our creative director, Sarah, forwarded your designs to the client as inspiration. The client's marketing team then worked with our in-house designers to adapt them. Adapt them? You mean copy them? I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to resolve this matter. I thought about Sarah, the junior creative director, who'd been so enthusiastic, who'd ghosted me without a second thought. She'd forwarded my work to the client as inspiration. She'd set this whole thing in motion. What happens to Sarah? I asked. Rachel's voice cooled. That's an internal matter. It's not part of the settlement. I looked at Priya again. She gave a small shrug. Your call. I need to think about it, I said. I'll get back to you. After the call, Priya and I debriefed. $50,000 is a good offer, she said. You could take it and walk away. But if you want more, if you want accountability, not just money, we can push. What would pushing look like? We could file a lawsuit.
Publicly.
The evidence is strong. We could demand not just compensation, but a public admission of wrongdoing. We could name names, the client, the agency, Sarah. But it would be a fight. They'd drag it out. And there's no guarantee we'd win more than $50,000. I thought about Sarah. About the client. About the millions of people who'd seen my work without knowing it was mine. I want the truth to come out, I said. I want people to know what they did. Priya nodded slowly. Then we file. So, what happens when we file the lawsuit? Does the agency try to bury us? And what does Sarah do when her name becomes public? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 3 is the legal battle, and the moment everything changes.
Subscribe.
The lawsuit made headlines within 24 hours. Freelancer sues major agency over Super Bowl ad theft. The story spread like wildfire through design blogs, industry publications, and mainstream news. Suddenly, I was everywhere: interviews, podcasts, social media debates. Some called me a hero. Others called me an opportunist. The agency's PR machine went into overdrive, issuing statements about creative inspiration and unfortunate misunderstandings. But the evidence was public now. The watermark, the emails, the timeline, and the world was watching. The first few weeks after filing were a blur. Priya handled the legal maneuvering while I navigated the media storm. I did interviews with design publications explaining my process, my watermark system, the importance of protecting creative work. I was careful not to comment on the ongoing case, but the story was out there, and the court of public opinion was already rendering its verdict. The agency's defense was predictable. They argued that my designs were inspiration, not infringement. They claimed that their in-house team had independently created the final ad concept. They pointed to minor differences between my work and theirs, a color variation here, a composition tweak there, as proof of originality. But the watermark was the smoking gun. No matter how they spun it, that tiny pattern of dots, my initials hidden in plain sight, was present in both my original files and the final ad. It was impossible to explain away. The discovery process was brutal. The agency's lawyers demanded everything: my hard drives, my email archives, my personal correspondence. They tried to paint me as a bitter freelancer out for revenge, as someone who deliberately designed copyable work to trap clients. It was exhausting and invasive. Then came Sarah's deposition. I wasn't in the room. Depositions are private, but Priya told me everything afterward. Sarah had been coached clearly, but under oath, the truth started to leak out. Did you send MS Zoe's designs to the client?
Yes.
As inspiration. Did you inform MS Zoe that her work was being shared with the client?
No.
Did you obtain her permission to share those designs?
No.
Did you ever intend to pay MS Zoe for her work? A long pause. Then, the project was speculative. We don't pay for speculative work. Speculative work that you then used in a $7 million Super Bowl ad? Sarah's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The narrative was shifting. The agency wasn't just accused of infringement. They were being exposed as exploitative, unethical, and arrogant. The client, Nova Beverages, tried to distance themselves. They issued a statement saying they'd relied on the agency's representations and were reviewing their relationship with Vanguard Creative. Translation: they were throwing the agency under the bus. Meanwhile, my freelance business exploded. Suddenly, everyone wanted to work with the designer who'd taken on a giant and won. I had more inquiries than I could handle, more opportunities than I'd ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me. The theft that had nearly destroyed me was now launching my career. But the case wasn't over. The agency, desperate to avoid a trial, made a new settlement offer. This time it was different. The offer came through Priya on a Friday afternoon. The agency was willing to pay $250,000, 5 times their original offer. They'd also issue a public apology and implement new policies to ensure fair treatment of freelancers. In exchange, I dropped the lawsuit and signed a non-disclosure agreement. It was a lot, more than I'd ever dreamed. But it came with a catch: silence. I'd have to disappear from the story, let the agency control the narrative, let Sarah and the others fade into anonymity. I thought about the 2 weeks of work, the excitement, the betrayal. I thought about the millions of people who'd seen my work without knowing it was mine. I thought about all the other freelancers who'd been exploited, who didn't have watermarks, who didn't have lawyers. I called Priya. What do you think? It's a good offer. It would change your life. But you have to decide what matters more, the money or the principle. So what do? Take the money and walk away, or hold out for something bigger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 4 is the decision and its consequences.
Subscribe.
I took 48 hours to decide. I barely slept, barely ate, just paced my apartment, running through every possible outcome in my head. $250,000. It would change my life, pay off my debts, fund my next projects, give me security I'd never had. But it came with a price: silence. I'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, disappear from the story, let the agency control the narrative. Sarah would keep her job. The client would move on. And the world would forget that a freelancer had taken on a giant and won. I called my mother first. She'd always been my rock, my voice of reason. She listened to the whole story, then asked one question. What does your gut tell you? My gut is confused. The money would make life so much easier. Life easier isn't the same as life better. You have to live with yourself after this. Which decision lets you do that? I called Priya next. She was professional, as always, but I could hear the weight in her voice. Zoe, I'll support whatever you decide. But I want you to understand what you're giving up if you take the settlement. Not just the money, the chance to set a precedent. To show other freelancers that they can fight back. To make this agency and others like it think twice before stealing from creatives. You think I should go to trial? I think you have a strong case. I think the watermark is powerful evidence. I think a jury would likely rule in your favor. But trials are unpredictable. And even if we win, the appeals could drag on for years. The settlement is certain. The trial is a gamble. I hung up and sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Then I thought about Sarah, about her deposition, her evasions, her comfortable job at a major agency, about the way she'd ghosted me, lied to me, used me, about the fact that she'd probably do it again, to someone else if there were no consequences. I thought about the other freelancers, the ones without watermarks, without lawyers, without the resources to fight back. The ones who'd been exploited and silenced, who'd swallowed their anger and moved on because they had no choice. I thought about my mother's question, which decision lets you live with yourself? I called Priya back. We're going to trial. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some people called me brave. Others called me foolish. The agency's lawyers, when they heard, immediately began preparing for a fight. The settlement offer was withdrawn. The gloves were off. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. In the meantime, the media frenzy intensified. I gave more interviews, wrote an op-ed for a major design publication, spoke at conferences about creative rights and the importance of protecting your work. The agency launched a counter-campaign, painting me as a publicity seeker, a gold digger, a bitter freelancer out for revenge. But the watermark was still there. The evidence was still public. And the court of public opinion was firmly on my side. The week before trial, I got an unexpected email. It was from Sarah.
Zoe.
I know you have no reason to listen to me. I know I've done terrible things. But I need you to know that I'm not the person you think I am. I was following orders. The client wanted your work, and I didn't have the courage to say no. I've lost my job. I've lost my reputation. I've lost everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'll be testifying truthfully at the trial. Sarah. I stared at the email for a long time. Sarah, the woman who'd ghosted me, who'd stolen my work, who'd set this whole nightmare in motion, was now on my side, or at least on the side of truth. I forwarded the email to Priya. Her response was immediate. This changes everything. If Sarah testifies against the agency, our case is exponentially stronger. But why would she? She's implicating herself. Because she's already lost everything. Maybe she wants to clear her conscience. Maybe she's angry at the agency for throwing her under the bus. Maybe she just wants the truth to come out. The trial began on a Monday. The courtroom was packed with reporters, designers, curious onlookers. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Priya, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart pounding. The agency's lawyers sat across from us, surrounded by binders and laptops and the confidence of people who'd never lost. The judge, a woman named Morrison, called the court to order. The opening statements began, and I prepared for the fight of my life. So, what happens when Sarah takes the stand? Does her testimony seal the agency's fate? And what will the jury decide? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The final part is the verdict, and the moment everything changes.
Subscribe.
The trial lasted 3 weeks. 21 days of testimony, evidence, and legal maneuvering. I watched as Sarah took the stand and told the truth about the client's demands, about the pressure she was under, about the moment she decided to forward my designs without permission. I watched as the agency's lawyers tried to discredit her, to paint her as a bitter ex-employee with an axe to grind. I watched as my watermark was projected on a screen, fangdar for the jury to see, undeniable proof that my work had been stolen. And then I watched as the jury filed out to deliberate. The deliberation took 2 days. I spent them in a fog, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except the 12 people in that room deciding my future. Priya tried to keep me calm, but nothing could penetrate the anxiety. On the second day, at 4 p.m., the bailiff called. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly, reporters, designers, agency executives, curious onlookers. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clammy, my heart pounding. The agency's lawyer sat across from us, their faces carefully neutral. Sarah was in the gallery, her eyes fixed on the jury box. The judge entered. The jury filed in. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed a piece of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Morrison read it silently, then looked up. "Will the plaintiff please rise?" I stood, my legs trembling. "On the charge of copyright infringement, how does the jury find?" The foreman unfolded the paper. "We find the defendant liable." A murmur ran through the courtroom. I gripped the table to steady myself. "On the charge of fraud and misrepresentation? Liable." "On the charge of unjust enrichment? Liable." 3 counts. Liable on all 3. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them, then turned to the damages phase. Priya had prepared a detailed accounting of my losses, the value of my work, the damage to my career, the emotional distress. The agency's lawyers argued that the damages should be minimal, that I'd suffered no real harm. The jury deliberated on damages for another day. When they returned, the foreman read the number. $2.3 million. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Agency executives sat in stunned silence. I collapsed into my chair, tears streaming down my face. Priya squeezed my arm. "You did it." The aftermath was overwhelming. The story made headlines around the world. I was interviewed by major networks, featured in magazines, invited to speak at conferences. My freelance business exploded. I had more work than I could handle, more opportunities than I'd ever imagined. But more importantly, the case changed the conversation about creative rights. Agencies started reviewing their policies. Freelancers started watermarking their work. The industry slowly began to shift. Sarah reached out after the trial. We met for coffee, a strange and awkward reunion. She'd lost her job, her reputation, her career. But she'd also found something, a clear conscience, a sense of peace. "I'm sorry for everything," she said. "For using you, for lying, for not standing up sooner. I know, and I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to move on." We talked for an hour, 2 strangers bound by a painful history. When we parted, I felt lighter than I had in years. The $2.3 million changed my life, but not in the way I expected. I didn't buy a house or a car, or any of the things people assume you'd buy. Instead, I started a foundation, a nonprofit that provides free legal support to freelancers and creatives whose work has been stolen. We've helped hundreds of people since, from graphic designers to photographers to writers. It's the legacy I'm most proud of. The micro-niche here isn't just creative rights or copyright infringement. It's about the courage to fight back, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about the power of proof, a watermark, an email, a timestamp, to hold the powerful accountable. It's about a community of creatives who learn that they don't have to accept exploitation as the cost of doing business. Have you ever had your work stolen by a client or company? Did you fight back, or did you let it go? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of creators who support each other, protect each other, and refuse to be silenced. And if this story of watermarks, lawsuits, and hard-won justice resonated with you, share it. Every share is a warning to those who would steal from creatives. Every share is a reminder that we have power if we're brave enough to use it. Thanks for listening.